The room is quiet except for the sound of a refrigerator humming somewhere in the dark. You're standing there with your phone in your hand, staring at a message that hasn't been answered in 3 days. Not because they didn't see it, not because they forgot, but because somewhere deep inside them, something changed. And you can feel it. The warmth they used to carry around you has gone cold. The softness in their voice disappeared first, then the long conversations, then the little check-ins, then the way they looked at you like they could see through every wall you built around yourself. Now there's just distance. Not loud distance, not angry distance, the kind that arrives silently, like someone slowly packing their emotional bags without making a sound. And the terrifying part is, you don't even remember the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was the joke you made at their expense. Maybe it was the night they needed honesty and you gave them manipulation instead. Maybe it was the 10th time they forgave something they never should have had to forgive. Because when an empath finally disappears from your life, they usually leave emotionally long before they leave physically. And most people never notice the funeral until the ghost is already gone. Empaths do not leave because of one mistake. That's the first thing most people misunderstand. They leave because of patterns. Tiny emotional betrayals repeated so consistently that eventually the empath stops trying to convince themselves you care. See, empaths are dangerous in a way people rarely talk about. Not dangerous because they yell, not because they dominate rooms, not because they seek revenge. They're dangerous because they can feel the truth underneath your performance. You can smile at them while secretly resenting them. You can say, "I'm fine," while emotionally withdrawing. You can fake affection, fake loyalty, fake attention. But an empath notices the microscopic pause before you answer, the shift in your tone, the way your eyes lose warmth for half a second, the emotional static behind your words. And at first, they excuse it. That's what makes them vulnerable. They will sit awake at 2 a.m. trying to understand your pain instead of protecting themselves from it. They will replay your childhood wounds in their mind and accidentally turn your cruelty into something forgivable. Because empaths have this tragic tendency to overhumanize the people who hurt them. They don't just see what you did, they see why you did it. And sometimes that compassion becomes self-destruction. So they stay longer than they should. They keep giving chances long after respect has died in the relationship. They keep translating your silence into stress, your manipulation into fear, your distance into emotional exhaustion. But something very important happens after enough disappointment. An empath eventually reaches emotional clarity. And when that moment arrives, it is almost impossible to reverse. Because contrary to popular belief, empaths are not endlessly emotional people. They are observers, quiet observers. They collect emotional evidence for months while pretending everything is okay. Every broken promise gets stored somewhere, every dismissive comment, every moment you made them feel emotionally unsafe. Every time they walked away from a conversation feeling smaller than when they entered it. And the entire time, you think they're enduring, but they're actually deciding. That's the frightening part. Most people think the empath's breaking point looks dramatic, crying, screaming, explosive arguments. No. The real breaking point is silence. It's the day they stop explaining how they feel. The day they stop asking for reassurance. The day they stop fighting to repair the connection. Because when an empath becomes emotionally quiet, the relationship is already standing at the edge of a cliff. And people almost always react too late. Suddenly they notice the distance. Suddenly they want to communicate. Suddenly they miss the warmth they took for granted. But emotional trust is strange. It's built in drops and lost in buckets. An empath can survive pain. They can survive misunderstandings. They can survive difficult seasons. What they cannot survive forever is emotional inconsistency, especially when they loved you sincerely. Because sincere love changes the nervous system. It opens emotional doors most people keep locked their entire lives. And when someone repeatedly turns that vulnerability into confusion, neglect, or manipulation, the empath's mind begins associating love with danger. That's when the disappearance begins. Not physical disappearance, internal disappearance. They stop reaching for you emotionally, stop leaning toward you, stop showing you the deepest parts of themselves. You may still see them beside you. You may still hear them laugh. You may still receive their messages, but the soul of the connection has already started fading out of the room. And the terrifying thing about an empath is this: once they finally detach, they rarely announce it. One day you simply realize the person who once loved you with unbearable depth no longer feels reachable. And in the next keynote, there's something even more unsettling hiding beneath this silence. Because the empath was never just reacting to your actions. They were reacting to what your actions revealed about who you truly are. There is a moment an empath experiences that most people never even realize exists. It's not anger. It's not heartbreak. It's disappointment so deep, it becomes irreversible. And once an empath reaches that emotional threshold, something inside them shuts off with terrifying calmness. Because the truth is, empaths don't leave when they stop loving you. They leave when they finally understand you. That's the part nobody talks about. People assume empaths are emotional creatures driven entirely by feeling. But real empaths are pattern readers, human lie detectors. They watch behavior the way meteorologists watch storms forming over oceans. Quietly, patiently, precisely. They notice contradictions most people miss. The way someone speaks kindly in public but coldly in private. The way affection appears only when they fear losing control. The way apologies arrive without changed behavior attached to them. And at first, the empath keeps hoping those contradictions are temporary, because hope is the empath's greatest strength, and sometimes their greatest weakness. They believe in hidden goodness, potential, growth, healing, so they stay emotionally invested in people who are slowly draining them dry. But eventually, the empath begins seeing something they can no longer unsee. Your patterns reveal your priorities. Not your words, not your promises, not your emotional speeches at midnight. Your patterns. A person who truly values you does not repeatedly make you feel emotionally unsafe. And when an empath finally accepts that truth, the emotional fog disappears all at once. It's almost chilling how fast it happens. One day they're begging for clarity. The next day they're emotionally gone. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring started costing them their peace. See, empaths live with a nervous system that absorbs emotional environments like a sponge absorbs water. They feel tension in rooms before anyone speaks. They feel resentment hidden beneath politeness. They feel emotional instability long before chaos becomes visible. And when they spend too much time around manipulation, inconsistency, passive cruelty, or emotional selfishness, their body begins reacting before their mind fully catches up. They become exhausted all the time, detached, quiet, emotionally numb, not because they're weak, because their nervous system is overloaded from carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to begin with. That's why the empath's disappearance often confuses people, because externally, it looks sudden, but internally, they've been grieving the relationship for months. Every ignored feeling, every invalidated emotion, every time they made excuses for behavior that slowly broke their trust. And eventually the empath realizes something devastating. They have been trying to receive love from someone who only knows how to receive it, not give it. That realization changes everything. Because once an empath sees that the relationship is emotionally one-sided, they stop trying to rescue it alone. And this is where people make the fatal mistake. They mistake the empath's patience for weakness. But patience is not weakness, patience is observation. An empath can tolerate enormous pain while deciding whether your heart is safe enough to stay connected to. They watch whether accountability exists inside you, whether empathy exists inside you, whether your words and actions can coexist without contradiction. And if the answer keeps becoming no, they slowly begin emotionally evacuating. You can actually hear it in their silence if you listen carefully. The shorter responses, the softer reactions, the absence of emotional intensity. The empath stops trying to convince you to care, because deep down they've understood something painful. You cannot force emotional depth into someone who benefits from remaining shallow. And once that realization settles into them, their energy changes forever. This is why people are often shocked when empaths leave without dramatic closure. But closure was never necessary for the empath. The evidence already closed the case. That's what makes their detachment so unsettling. There's no performance attached to it. No revenge campaign, no desperate need to hurt you back. Just absence. Cold, quiet absence. like someone turning off a light in a house they once planned to live in forever. And strangely, that silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. Because when an empath stops explaining themselves, it usually means they've accepted a truth they wished wasn't true. But there's another layer to this that most people never understand. The empath is not only reacting to how you treated them, they're reacting to who they became while loving you. This is the part that breaks an empath the most. Not what you did to them, but what loving you slowly turned them into. Because empaths enter relationships with openness. They arrive emotionally barefoot. No armor, no calculation, no hidden agenda. They love in a way that exposes the deepest parts of who they are without asking for guarantees in return. And for a while that vulnerability feels beautiful. They listen to your pain like it matters. They memorize the invisible details about you, the shifts in your breathing, the stories you only tell when you're tired, the version of yourself you hide from the rest of the world. An empath doesn't just love your personality, they love your emotional landscape. But something tragic happens when that level of love is given to the wrong person. The empath slowly starts abandoning themselves to maintain the connection. At first it's subtle. They silence small feelings to avoid conflict. They become more patient with disrespect than they should be. They explain away behaviors that quietly wound them. And because empaths are naturally introspective, they often assume they are the problem first. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I'm misunderstanding them. So instead of protecting their emotional boundaries, they start reshaping themselves around someone else's emotional limitations. That's how the erosion begins. Not through one catastrophic betrayal, but through constant self-betrayal. The empath becomes smaller in places where they once felt alive. They stop speaking as freely, stop expressing needs as openly, stop trusting their instincts as deeply. And the terrifying thing is, this transformation happens so gradually they barely notice it themselves. Until one day they look in the mirror emotionally and realize they no longer recognize the person staring back at them. That realization is devastating. Because empaths can survive pain easier than they can survive disconnection from themselves. They can forgive mistakes, forgive imperfections, forgive human weakness. But the moment they realize a relationship is costing them their identity, something primal awakens inside them. Self-preservation. And when that instinct finally activates, the empath begins reclaiming themselves piece by piece. Quietly. They stop over-explaining, stop chasing reassurance, stop begging to be emotionally chosen by someone who keeps offering conditional affection. People often mistake this stage for coldness. It's not coldness. It's grief transforming into clarity. The empath finally understands that love should not require the destruction of the self. That realization changes the entire nervous system. Because when someone spends months or years walking on emotional eggshells, their body adapts to survival mode. They become hyper-aware of tone shifts, facial expressions, silence, emotional unpredictability. They stop feeling relaxed around the person they love, and once safety disappears, intimacy slowly dies behind it. That's the hidden truth most people never understand. Empaths do not detach because they stopped loving you. They detach because loving you stopped feeling safe, and no human being can sustainably attach themselves to emotional danger forever. Eventually, the empath reaches a terrifying emotional crossroads. They must choose between maintaining the relationship or maintaining themselves. And for a long time, they try to save both. That's why they communicate so much in the beginning, why they give chances nobody else would give, why they stay after disappointments that would have made others leave immediately. Not because they lack self-worth, because they believe people can heal. But repeated emotional pain eventually teaches the empath a brutal lesson. Potential is not the same thing as reality. Who someone could become means nothing if who they currently are keeps hurting you. That truth is almost impossible for an empath to accept at first. Because once they love someone, they don't just see the present version of them. They see the wounded child, the future version, the hidden goodness buried underneath defense mechanisms and fear. But eventually, reality becomes louder than hope. And when that happens, the empath begins emotionally returning to themselves. You can feel the shift immediately. Their energy becomes unreachable. Not cruel, not hostile, just unavailable. Like a door that once stood wide open now closing softly without a sound. And this is where people panic. Because suddenly the empath who once fought for the relationship no longer argues, no longer pleads, no longer reacts emotionally to the same things that once devastated them. That silence terrifies people. Because they realize too late that the empath wasn't asking for perfection all along. They were asking to feel emotionally safe while loving you. And in the final keynote, there's one last truth almost nobody is prepared for. What happens after the empath finally stops looking back? The strange thing about losing an empath is that most people don't feel it immediately. At first, life continues normally. The phone is still in your hand. The days still move forward. Distractions still exist. But then something begins happening in the silence they left behind. You start noticing the absence of things you once thought would always be there. The warmth, the understanding, the emotional patience, the feeling that someone saw the broken parts of you without turning away. And suddenly the world feels colder than it used to. Because empaths bring something into people's lives that cannot be easily replaced. Emotional presence. Real presence. Not attention, not attachment, not convenience. Presence. The kind that makes you feel emotionally visible. And most people don't realize how rare that is until it's gone. See, empaths spend so much time studying the emotional needs of others that they become experts at making people feel understood. They remember the invisible details, the emotional bruises hidden behind someone's personality, the insecurities disguised as arrogance, the loneliness disguised as independence. They love people in the places nobody else bothers to look. That's why their absence echoes so loudly afterward. Because once they leave, many people discover something deeply uncomfortable. Very few connections feel real after an empath. Conversations start feeling surface level. Affection starts feeling performative. Relationships start feeling emotionally thin. And suddenly the person who once seemed too sensitive becomes the standard every future connection is silently compared against. But by then, the empath is usually already gone for good. Because here's the final truth nobody prepares you for. Empaths rarely return to places where they lost themselves. Not out of pride, not revenge, not stubbornness. Survival. Once they finally escape a connection that drained their spirit, they begin rebuilding a relationship with themselves. And that rebuilding process changes them permanently. They become quieter, more discerning, more protective of their energy. The empath who returns after heartbreak is not the same empath who entered it. There's wisdom in them now, boundaries, a deeper understanding of how dangerous unchecked compassion can become. Because one of the hardest lessons empaths ever learn is this. You can deeply understand someone and still need to walk away from them. That realization matures them in painful ways. They stop trying to save people who refuse accountability. Stop confusing emotional intensity with genuine love. Stop believing their loyalty alone can heal emotionally unavailable people. And perhaps most painfully, they stop abandoning themselves just to keep someone else comfortable. That's when the transformation becomes complete. The empath no longer chases closure, no longer needs revenge, no longer waits for apologies that may never come. Because they finally understand something powerful. The greatest form of self-respect is refusing to remain where your spirit continuously breaks. And once an empath reaches that level of clarity, their disappearance becomes permanent. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves too. That's the part many people never expect. They assume the empath will always forgive, always return, always leave the door cracked open emotionally. But eventually the empath realizes that constantly reopening wounds in the name of love is not compassion, it's self-destruction. So one day, without announcement, they let go completely. And what makes this ending so haunting is that it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. No explosion, no final war, no theatrical goodbye. Just a human being slowly reclaiming their peace, and somewhere much later, often long after the relationship has ended, the other person finally understands what they lost. Not perfection, not someone flawless, but someone who loved them with rare emotional sincerity, in a world where most people only know how to perform connection instead of truly feeling it. And by then, the empath has already learned how to live without looking back.